This is Councilman Joe Borelli, who's the Republican candidate and the incumbent. He's a native Staten Islander and lives in Annandale with his wife Rachel, who hopefully we'll see, and their child, Joseph.
Hopefully you won't hear.
And won't hear, right? I can see it, but not hear. And he holds a BA from Marius College and from the College of Staten Island, where he's also now an adjunct professor of political science. So Joe was elected to serve the constituents of the 51st Council District in a special election that was held in 2015. And prior to that, he was represented the South Shore in the New York State Assembly. And now he serves on various committees, including economic development, governmental operations, mental health, developmental disability, alcoholism, substance abuse and disability services, technology, veterans, and waterfronts. And if you want to know his platform, what he stands for, more fully, then you can refer to his website, josephborelli.com. And on my left, your right, is Dylan Michael Schwartz, who's also a native Staten Islander, raised in Bay Terrace, attended Staten Island Technical High School before studying economics at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. And there, Dylan honed his community service and organizing skills advocating for LGBT concerns before coming back to Staten Island to take care of his sick mother, and now lives with his fiancée in Bay Terrace. He serves as executive director, he still do, of the Democratic Organization of Richmond County, but not anymore, and founded the Rose and Thorn Consulting and Election Technologies, LLC, working mostly in the medical and marijuana industry, still do, a cause that he supports and wishes to expand. So his website is as we concerned about many of the issues we are, which we're going to ask about now. And if you wish to look at his platform, then you can look to dylanforcouncil.com. So just a few ground rules. So we're going to give each candidate an opportunity to say something about what they stand for and what their hopes are for this part of the island. But I want to just make sure that if we do get to the point of asking questions from the audience, because I have some prepared questions that people sent in to me that I will ask. And we want to make sure that they're not personal attacks or they're not acrimonious. This is a civil debate, discussion about the issues. And we're not going to go into national politics, so if you have some idea that you want to relate this to these national kinds of issues that are not germane to this South Shore, then we're not going to entertain those as well. My name is Rabbi Stephen Stern, and I'm going to try to moderate. So we'll ask Dylan if you could still.
I was going to give the incumbent the opportunity to go first. Thank you, everyone. My name is Dylan Schwartz, South Shore Staten Islander. Pretty much my entire life was raised in Bay Terrace by a single mom. And my dad lived in Tottenville, in Huguenot, I went to IS-34 and IS-75, just up the street as a kid. My mom is really who inspired me to do this work, inspired me to run for our community. I moved home 5 years ago to take care of my mom when she got sick. I got the call during President Obama's inauguration that she was in multi-system organ failure. And I did what any son would do. I came home to take care of my mom the same way that she took care of me. And it was through that experience that I learned just how little access our community has to healthcare resources when we really need them. You can't get a home health aide in our district, or at least we couldn't. The truth of the matter is you get someone for 2 or 3 days, and then all of a sudden they want to quit on you because they want to go back up to the North Shore where the bevy of that workforce really is. To some extent, you can't blame the workers. They're not paid very well. And in places like where they're from, Port Richmond or Stapleton, they want to work in their community because the transportation across island isn't great. They want to do the same things that people in our community want to do, which is go to work in 20 or 30 minutes and get home to be able to be with their kids. My stepfather and I did this every day for 3 years. My stepfather was a glazier. He's a glazier. Travels 2 hours to work every single day, like many people in our community, 2 hours back and forth. Just like those home health aides, you don't want to spend that 45 minutes to come down and see us. He would like the opportunity to be able to work in our community. We have projects like Riverside Galleria and Nassau Smelting that are coming up before our community for variances, in which it's incumbent upon folks in leadership to be pushing to ensure that those projects are being done local and union made. The fastest way to cut a 4-hour commute is to prevent the need for it in the first place. Main issues I want to focus on are healthcare, fixing that hospital in Sagayan, pushing to fight to make sure it can be full service, the opportunity to co-locate services at that site, the same way that they do with public and private services in schools, charter and public. Focusing on pushing for local union labor on projects, treating the opiate epidemic. Someone who's raised by an addict and someone who's lost loved ones to the opiate epidemic, I recognize that this is the worst public health crisis that we've had since HIV. And frankly, we need to treat it like a public health crisis. We are stigmatizing people who are suffering with addiction the same way we stigmatize gay people in the 80s. We haven't been talking openly. We haven't been doing the work that we need to do to make sure that we get the resources we need to combat this. And those are the things I'm going to be focusing on. Thank you.
I prefer to stand, everyone. So good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Joe Borelli. Right now I represent you as your city councilman. Prior to that, I was your state assemblyman representing the 62nd district, which many of you live in, but coincidentally this synagogue is actually districted out of it for an odd reason. I live here in Annandale. I've lived on this area my whole life. I was actually born and raised here in Arden Heights. I lived in Sussex Green, which is just on the other side of the park by PS4. I attended PS4 for a while before also going to Our Lady Star of the Sea and then St. Joseph High School and then on to college and so on and so forth. I've been active in our community. Prior to that, I was chief of staff to the former councilman Vincent Ignizio, who represented the community for about a decade before retiring for greener pastures and running Catholic Charities in New York. I'm in this because my son's here. Rachel, here.
Did you come in?
Sorry, hopefully my son doesn't yell. But this is the neighborhood where I live. This is the neighborhood where I'm raising my family. This is where, my son will go to school. This is the neighborhood where my son will attend, playgrounds and stuff like that. That's why I'm running. I'm not running for any other reason. I'm not running for any grandiose purpose. I'm running because I think this is a Staten Island that needs to be preserved. This is a Staten Island that needs to go forward. I had the pleasure of attending some events here at the synagogue over the year. I was talking to Rabbi Stern earlier of an earlier event, and I actually just want to mention that I reached out to a dear friend of mine who I unfortunately just heard passed away, Bernie Kahn.
Bernie Kahn.
I actually reached out to him recently to see if he was coming to this event, and then I heard the unfortunate news from a couple of weeks ago. He was a wonderful guy, and we had worked together on a charity for gastrostomal cancer. So, I'm a vehemently pro-Israel candidate. I'm speaking to a Jewish group. I think that's something we should talk about. I am an honorary member, as the chairman of the Jewish caucus will say, of the Jewish caucus, which means I get to go on fun trips and meet members of the Knesset, and I've gotten the opportunity to meet Israeli politicians from people on the far left, Tzipi Livni, to people on the right, Naftali Bennett. If you're interested in Israeli politics, I could probably talk to you about it another time. We also do many things in the city council dealing with the state of Israel, from opposing the BDS movement to condemning anti-Semitic activity. Unfortunately, we had a number of incidents earlier this year involving folks, and thankfully the mayor came out at a press conference and spoke. Anytime I speak to a group like this, I like to just think about where we are and talk about some of the things I've done in the immediate vicinity. The woods behind us, Arden Woods, were the woods I grew up in. It's where I used to play and ride a bike and pick my nose as a kid. And just this year, we got $1 million in capital to do some new trails, some new barriers to clean that up. Right across the street, just announced that we'll be paving the Arden Avenue exit. I don't know how many of you had a bumpy ride coming in. This is one of those projects that have been long needed. I'm proud to say we finally got it done. A couple of weeks ago, just down the street on Arthur Hill Road, we got some sidewalks repaired. The Owl Hollow Playground that I started working on as a staffer in 2004, the mayor actually came out here my first year in government and announced that this project would happen. And it took almost 10 years, and it was in 2012 or 2011 when it finally came to fruition. The lack of sidewalks was the impetus for my first piece of legislation that I passed as a council member, which changed the city's policy on how sidewalks are built in relation to parks and public facilities. I used to play at the JCC down the road. It was where I attended preschool, and I also was on the intramural basketball team. I was awful, but I was a lot of fun. When I first came into the council, I tried to make it a mission to rebuild part of the Avis building down there. And I had great relationships with the board members of the JCC. And as it turns out, the JCC is unable to accept City Council capital money for that project. So now we're on to a new phase 2 of possibilities for that Avis building. But I'm very confident that we hopefully will have a big announcement coming soon. I know it's a resource that many of you care about, many of your kids, and you guys attend senior centers there, and you like to go to the gym there and stuff like that. So with that, I guess I will just turn it over and open it up to questions.
Thank you. So you both mentioned, I think, the opioid epidemic. So I think it would be a good starting point to find out. We know what the status of this is here on the island and the South Shore. We'd like to ask the candidates what they would do to what the state of assistance is, programs are now to try to improve conditions there. So could we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So it's not a question of what can we do in the future. Obviously, that's part of it, but it's also what have we done in the past. And there's certainly 2 components to the opioid problem. Obviously, one end of it is recovery, and that's something that we can all agree needs more services on Staten Island. And the other side is law enforcement, so I'll take the law enforcement side first. The Staten Island delegation, myself, Steve Matteo, and Debbie Rose, we joined together this year along with our district attorney to get more funding for our DA's office, specifically for more narcotics prosecutors. And what the DA is doing with that money is he is going out and actually investigating cases of overdose deaths and following up. And this is something that I actually will be critical of people who didn't do this in the past. But he's following up with people who died of overdoses and trying to work back a case to see how they came into contact with heroin, whether it was fentanyl-laced, et cetera, et cetera. Also, I've spent $1 million of your taxpayer money and allocated towards an NYPD camera system, which is going to be placed 27 cameras on the South Shore of Staten Island. All but 3 of them will be in my district. I gave Matteo a couple, he's a nice guy. But many of them will be around high crime areas. When we talk about crimes, we're talking about the petty crimes that we often hear about with the car break-ins, people pulling on things. Most of the time when we catch those people doing that, they also have drugs on them or have drug problems. We've also outfitted all of our towns, included in the South Shore Business Improvement Districts, with cameras. Last year we did Great Kills Town. There's 7 cameras in Great Kills that are run by the South Shore Business Improvement District. What that does is it gives the police access to films. We all have been to Great Kills, and we all have different opinions about what's going on in the storefronts, and now we have cameras pointing directly at those storefronts, and the police are very happy about that. This year we did Elkingville. The cameras are installed. There's 6 cameras now in that town. And next year we'll finish the 3 towns in South Shore bid and go into Adamtown. On the recovery side, before I got into the city council, I was not a board member because I'm precluded from being a board member, but I was heavily involved with the Beanie Foundation and their formation of Carl's House, which is a place right on Veterans Road, right by the Lowe's. And it's a place focused on peer-to-peer counseling and peer-to-peer referrals. And I know firsthand that they have saved over 100 lives in the past 18 months since they've been open. And it was a very proud day that I was able to provide seed money for them to open up and to just keep the lights on for a year. It's a nonprofit, so it's a fight every year to find them enough money to succeed. But when you have people in recovery who are counseling other people in recovery and showing them the light at the end of the tunnel, that is mission critical. In addition to Carl's House, I also was able to provide seed money to Christopher's Reason, which is affiliated with another recovery center in Brooklyn, but they've opened up a satellite recovery center here in Charleston, and they're doing a great job too, and they actually offer the services right on site. We have a number of other things that I've done. I mean, I've certainly been funding the Staten Island YMCA, who has an outpatient program. We've been trying to work with Dynamite, DYC. A lot of people from Staten Island end up going to the DYC program, which is the first stage of it is located upstate. The second stage of it is actually a halfway house in Brooklyn. And the third step of it is people get to come home oftentimes to Staten Island, and they have to travel back to Brooklyn for their meetings 3 or 4 times a week. We're working with Dynamite to open up another center on Staten Island. I'm rambling on a little bit, and I'll give my opponent the option, but I think one of the biggest victories I had was Staten Island Mental Health Society had a program that that was servicing 97 adults who were addicted to drugs. And the funding for this program started with the Sandy funding and Sandy counseling money. And in 2016, the money for that program ran, 2015, the money for that program ran out. And the folks in this SIMH program would have been high and dry, and they would have been without. And I worked very hard, and I have to give the mayor credit, because when I made the case to the mayor, the price tag was about $350,000, pretty expensive program. But the mayor recognized the need, and we were able to save that program. So again, just some small victories. The truth is, we in government need help. I mean, we need help both in terms of helping people get access to service, which we have to provide a better job, but we also need the public's help in when you see something, say something. Many times, I'll encounter a mom or something at a block party, and they'll confide with me that their son is using drugs or whatever the case may be, and I always implore them, please, and this goes to anyone here, please give me the information, and you can be anonymous of who you know is dealing drugs in your neighborhood and who you know may be dealing drugs. And we have a great relationship with Staten Island Narcotics, the 122 and the 123, and they have always followed up every single time on every tip I've ever given them, and they've not only always ended up in arrests, but if we're not telling the police who's dealing drugs, it doesn't make it any easier for them to do their job. So please feel free to call me at any time, or Facebook me, or tweet any tips you may have.
As I said, the opiate epidemic is extraordinarily close to my heart. I lost my brother to an overdose when I was a kid, and I was raised in the rooms. My mother was sober the last 17 years of her life. We used to have AA meetings in our living room. So I've seen what happens when people do the work to get well. I differ with the councilman on this point. Councilmember focused a lot on law enforcement, and I'm a true believer that if we could incarcerate our way out of this problem, we would have by now. And it's not to say that incarceration is not a part of our toolkit, where people are knowingly dealing things that they know are going to kill, hurt, and maim other people. We need to be aggressive about that. There was someone in my neighborhood, in my cul-de-sac in Bay Terrace, who was actually caught 2 years ago on audio laughing about the types of overdoses that people were having. And the guy couldn't breathe, and he was purple in the face, and that's a monster. That's someone that needs to be behind bars. Catching drug dealers can be like playing whack-a-mole. My focus is on saving lives. The Food and Drug Administration put out a request for proposals 2 years ago on an app to connect people who carried Narcan with people who needed it. And regardless of our political differences, I'm sure the council member and I could agree that regardless of who is in charge of the federal government, they take a long time. And so we can adapt a program like that to our communities, and we're calling that as the NERV program, the Naloxone Emergency Response Volunteer Program. Councilmember and I also agree that in parts of our community you call 911 and they would get you in New Jersey. People in Great Hills don't believe me when I tell them that, and I said, well, try them in the top for a couple days. I carry a supercomputer in my pocket that can tell me where every restaurant is within a quarter mile of where I live. Why can't I use that same technology to alert the people in my community who carry Narcan when there's a crisis? I'm a former hotline representative for a group called Harbor House of Central Florida. I used to be a survivor advocate for survivors of domestic violence. I had privilege and confidentiality in the state after I took an additional 30 hours of training, and I would help men and women create safety plans. And so I wrapped all of that together to come up with the idea to say, well, if you could text OD to 911 and alert people who carried Narcan who opted in your community, that we would give additional training to, say something like 30 hours, to be proficient, to respond first in a crisis. I was a little bit late this morning, and many of us in our community know that traffic's a real problem here. And in certain parts of the day, I don't care how many sirens you have on the car, you're just not getting through certain streets if there's a problem. But your neighbor can get there. And if your neighbor saves your life, you are more likely to get into treatment. When someone you know intervenes, you're more likely to get help. So this would shorten response times, ensure that a sober-minded person was on the scene when cops or EMS or fire arrived behind, because they would get that same signal. And we can continue to lower the opiate death rate. Thank you.
Well, you brought up transportation, and that is, of course, a concern for a lot of people, the difficulty of traversing Staten Island from one end to the other. And so I think that's just a natural question that we would like to ask the two of you. In what ways do you think we could improve transportation, either through ferries or through some other vehicle that would enable us to get around much faster? I'd like to hear from the two of you about that. We'll start with you.
Question, who's on first? The ferry is the clear and present option. You know, I worked in, after Sandy in 2013, I worked in Queens for Councilmember Peter Malone Jr. when he was running for judge, or when he was running for borough president. He is now a judge. And I went to the Rockaways often with him on trips and noticed that they were keeping their ferry. And they were doing something a little bit different from what I had noticed we were doing out here. Their community, their elected officials, their civic community leaders were going door to door with petitions to not only let people know where that ferry was, when it was leaving, and what they needed to do as a community in order to keep those services. And they did. They're a part of the 5-borough ferry plan. We did not. We had one in Great Hills. And it worked reasonably well. And you talk to most people in their 20s, though, and they didn't even know it existed. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't a perfect system. But it was one that allowed you to get to work in 45 minutes. Sometimes 40, or even now if you had to drive a little bit, but that's a lot better than what we have now. The proposals on the table now for ferry service would cost $500 a month? Probably six. It's the equivalent of the property taxes that people in this community are paying. There have to be better ways to go about this when other folks in the city don't have that same problem. Other communities in the city, even the ones that are a part of that 5-borough ferry plan, are paying nowhere near what we're being expected to pay. There are cities and townships in New Jersey that are looking for ferry systems, and while this is something we would have to work with the state in order to pull in, there's no reason you couldn't start a boat in New Jersey, have it dock in Staten Island, and then continue on the path. You know, and that's frankly the best way that we could go about it. And frankly, this district includes parts of Heartland Village and New Springville. Many folks in that district don't even know that they're in District 51 when you go knocking on their door. And they suffer after about 10 o'clock, about 10, 11 o'clock, their bus system shuts down. I would propose a BRT down Richmond Avenue that would stop at the mall, the transportation hub, the train, and then ideally a ferry stop on the East Shore. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. So, yeah, I mean, the biggest upsetting thing about the C Street ferry service that has been proposed over the past few weeks was actually not that it was going to cost potentially $600. It was actually that it wasn't very fast or efficient. The borough president and I did a time trial from the proposed landing site, which the developers of the Galleria Outlet Mall had sort of offered some space on the waterfront. They offered a number of parking spots. You know, there's a few things that we can control in government, there's a few things that we can't. And the C Street ferry service, they operated the same boats that they operate from Atlantic Highlands to Seaport. It was still a 55-minute ride, not accounting for the loading and offloading of passengers to get to Pier 11, which is downtown. The difficulty that the operators believe they would face is how you convince someone to take a ferry when the train is leaving from the Arthurville station right next door, and it actually beats you there. So that's the problem with that particular site. Other sites, I was going to Great Hills Ferry. Right, we had a fast ferry for about a year after Hurricane Sandy. And I'm sorry that you didn't know about it, but we did make every...
I knew about it.
Right, but I'm sorry that we didn't make every effort to let people know about it. I mean, I wouldn't concede that point because we pretty much did. And the ridership in the first couple of weeks was very high, and the ridership dropped off. the time trials and the actual headway time between ferries just wasn't efficient. The parking wasn't sufficient there. And unfortunately, even when we made it free for people to come, people still didn't use it, and the city just ended the service. We have other issues with the Staten Island Fast Ferry that are more complicated to deal with. I mean, the entire sort of South Shore along the Raritan Bay doesn't have the proper bathymetry, for those of you who are science people, to operate a fast ferry service. That would mean that you would either have to dredge monthly, bi-monthly, to have the ferry come in close to the pier, or have to build a 500-foot long pier out to the ocean to be able to access the ferry. You also need a site which has parking for 400 or 500 cars. The challenges finding those sites are what's really keeping us from a fast ferry on the South Shore. What's keeping us from not having a part of the citywide ferry system is Mayor de Blasio. And it's an outrage that we have existing piers that can be accessed in Stapleton that could be easily built to accommodate the Bay Ridge end of the fast ferry system that deals with the rest of the 5 boroughs. I mean, this is something that I think is appalling that the mayor would even call it the 5-borough ferry system at first, then he changed the name to the citywide ferry service. Some good news is that the Empire outlets will have a fast ferry going to Midtown when that opens up. This way you would be able to get off the train in St. George like you would get on the Staten Island ferry, and from there you could have the option of taking a fast ferry to Midtown. There's no magic wand for a fast ferry, and without the mayor's commitment to subsidize the service, yeah, we would be paying $600. I mean, that's why I answered kind of snarky. This could never happen without a subsidy from the city, and the mayor has put up every obstacle against giving the subsidy for our service, because our service would roughly cost, according to studies that were done in like 2005, our service would cost roughly $25 a rider compared to $8 a rider plus the subsidy that you get on East River service. That's a big hump for the city to handle, and the mayor's not eager to do it. It's our job to continue blasting him until they at least give us the Stapleton stop, which is just appalling. So that's bad de Blasio. Good de Blasio on transportation. I have to give him credit. Under the Bloomberg administration, the citywide or island-wide paving was only about 80 lane miles per year. And if you're a driver on Staten Island, I know most of you are, I'm sure most of you took a car here, you knew that when Bloomberg left office, the roads had never been as bad as they were. And just as I'm eager to criticize Bill de Blasio for his 5-borough ferry failure, I'm eager to praise him when he has upped the lane miles on Staten Island to 220 a year. I mean, that's more than 3 times about what the Bloomberg administration did. As far as other options, yeah, I mean, we need other options. I mean, express bus service has continued to rise, the ridership has continued to rise. The ATU, the Bus Drivers Union, has worked with me and Borough President Otto to basically overhaul the entire express bus operation. And we've had 3 public meetings. I think it was in the paper. I hope a number of you attended. I actually think a couple of you did. And the MTA and the union are working on a plan to basically shorten the ride. When the express bus routes were planned in the 1960s, right after the Verrazano Bridge was built, they were built to accommodate families that only had 1 car. So the goal was to travel as much around Staten Island as possible, picking up people a short walk from their house, and then taking a bus to Manhattan, and then accommodating a number of stops in either Midtown or downtown. That's just not the option in the model that we want to do now. And over the past 10 years, we've expanded the park and rides, because that's the model we want to go to. We want to go to where people who now have 2 cars per household, essentially, in the census data is telling us that, but people who have 2 cars per household would prefer to drive to a park and ride, and then from there jump on an express bus that only makes 1 or 2 stops before going into Manhattan. That's basically the gist of the MTA's new plan. There's a lot of good about the plan, there's a lot of bad about the plan. Obviously, if you're someone who had door-to-door service under the old plan and now you don't have that, that might be a problem for you. But overall, I think the good does outweigh the bad, and I'm optimistic about that. I'm rambling, so I'll leave it there. I do that sometimes.
Thank you. Maybe we could turn our attention a moment to the environment, and I'll actually read one of the questions that I received that seemed to be pointing. So this question is, this summer there's been a series of articles in the Advance about the trash and sewage that floats up onto our South Shore beaches. As a member of the Waterfront Committee, what have you and Joe Borelli attempted, or what does he try to plan, and what plans do you think that you might have for cleaning up that, and as well as flooding problems that our community faces? So, Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So the Waterfront Committee is headed by our councilwoman from the North Shore, Debbie Rose, and in the time I've been in the City Council, it met once, and a second time it met to visit the Alice Austin House for some sort of a meet and greet there. The Waterfront Committee doesn't necessarily deal with that sort of issue, just separate apart. It's more of a land use, more of a waterfront thing, but that's neither here nor there. The good news is that we're doing a number of cleanups on the waterfront. Just about every month, my office sponsors about 2 cleanups. Usually they're in conjunction with the 123 Precinct and the Parks Department, or we also use Natural Resource Protective Association and New York City H2O. If you go on my Facebook page, you'll see that there's no shortage in the summer months and the fall and the spring of opportunities for you to come and fill up a bag of garbage for us. There's also a great group in Tottenville that's an organic group that just formed from a Facebook page. They don't even have a name. They just post flyers all around town, and we sponsor them with bags and pickers and gloves, and they fill up hundreds and hundreds of bags every week. Similar group in Bay Terrace. Now, our office operates a clean team, and I think we do a better job, Steve Matteo and I, than our Democratic counterpart on the North Shore, who doesn't use the same clean team as us. But if you have any location on Staten Island that you want cleaned, you just have to call my office and give us the location. If it's private property, obviously there might be some restrictions that we can't go there. But I think we do a pretty good job of cleaning up some of the problems. The Parks Department also has a Charrington beach cleaner. It's a piece of equipment. We pressure them to use that whenever they can. Unfortunately, because the South Shore beaches are narrow and rockier, they can't actually access all of them. That's why we need to do good old-fashioned legwork. But the good news is we have a number of groups willing to sponsor with us. But I mean, more broadly on the environment, right now I'm soon to close on a deal with the Trust for Public Land. I mentioned the woods behind us, Arden Woods. People don't really realize it's a city park. So we're closing on a deal with the Trust for Public Land to save 17 acres of this forest, which is one of the last old-growth natural forests on Staten Island. For those of you who are history buffs, you would know that Staten Island was essentially cleared in the 19th and 18th century for farming. This was actually one of the oldest forests that are still in existence, and the good news is that we're saving an additional 17 acres from development. This is the 17 acres that are right behind Aspen Knolls. Aspen Knolls is zoned R3A, so if we don't save this property, it potentially could be townhouses, so it's very urgent. We're also saving another 10 or so acres on the Schwartz Avenue along Arthur Hill Road, the waterfront there, also working with Trust for Public Land. Fairview Park is another project that we are working on and is fully funded. I'm proud to say that the Borough President and I were able to get the funding to the Speaker's office, to the Mayor's office, to fully fund Fairview Park, which is directly behind the new Michaels. That park will include some outdoor recreation areas, a baseball and soccer field, but the majority of that park will be a natural area, which is now going through a reforestation process, and that will link to the 180 acres or so in Clay Pit Park. We're also going to be opening the, I think, largest solar farm in New York City, right along Arthur Hill Road. And this is a private company, Kinder Morgan, who owns the oil tanks that you might see when you drive down Arthur Hill Road. They are trying to partner wherever they own tank farms to build renewable energy. And we were eager to do it, and they didn't need my approval to do it. They needed my okay to do what's called a dedication of public easement. And I was very happy to work with them, and I think it's going to be a great thing. We also have a $200 million project coming online. The Brookfield landfill was a toxic landfill that existed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was a major problem, and I credit the Bloomberg administration for coming up with the vast majority of the money. Myself, Senator Lanza, Assemblyman Cusick, we have been on the CAC, the Citizens Advisory Committee, for this park for the last 7 or 8 years. And finally, this year in 2017, I'm hopeful, if someone knows the mayor here, I'm very optimistic that he would want to come out and announce this giant park is opening soon. But we're optimistic that in 2017, this park should open. So there are great things happening with the environment on the South Shore. People don't always associate me with the biggest environmentalist. I'm totally opposed to the bag tax, for argument's sake, and a lot of the environmental groups have criticized me for that. But there are some good things happening. And again, if you'd like to organize a cleanup, we'd be happy to sponsor it, show up with bagels and bags and gloves. Thanks.
I imagine the council member and I certainly agree that community involvement is central to protecting the environment. We're definitely approaching it in different ways. You know, the first things that I would do in the city council is to develop a caucus called the Outer Banks Caucus. Because what I've found across the city in doing work is that the South Shore of Staten Island, Eastern Brooklyn, Eastern Queens, the Northern Bronx, and Inwood all deal with similar problems, whether that be transportation inequity, healthcare inequity, or environmental issues along the coastline. You know, we need to be able to leverage our position in the South Shore of Staten Island to a greater degree. We have the highest union density in the city of New York. We have the highest number of native New Yorkers. And as you travel along in those districts that I just described, you see a similar makeup. You see a high density of union labor. You see a high density of native New Yorkers because the folks who have lived their lives in our community have been pushed to the outskirts. And so, you know, what I would say to that fact is you could potentially have up to 13 council members in a caucus of that size, allowing us the ability to fight for more funding so that there's more discretionary funding for cleanups as the council members described. But we need to be reforming the way that we're doing this work in government because the system is outdated. It's entirely by borough delegation, which is a big reason why we get the short end of the stick. You know, and I heard the council member in the last question was talking about a Stapleton Ferry and the Fast Ferry. I'm not focused on Stapleton, and regardless of whether the mayor is Mayor de Blasio or if Nicole happens to take the spot. You know, we need to be able to take those people on, but also work with them. And at some point, it's not them. At some point, it's us. At some point, it relies on the work that we're able to do as a community and what our representation is able to do to advocate for our needs. You know, there is an underpass in Bay Terrace that you can go swimming in when it rains. I would have done that as a campaign stunt had the NYPD not forbidden me from doing so. But it's been the same recurring problem year after year, and it seems as though the city just has no idea that this is happening. And I'm just left wondering why that is.
Speaking about change and big changes, some people are interested in what the two of you feel about the potential for voting to allow a New York State constitutional convention, which would of course make potentially major changes, and I'd like to hear how you would think about that possibility.
So I've actually had the opportunity to work on ballot initiatives before, primarily involving medical cannabis around the country. And I've seen the benefit that those ballot initiatives can provide. However, in the state of New York, you have those mechanisms in place already to achieve them. For those unfamiliar with the Constitutional Convention, it will be on the back of your ballot. I am urging the people in this community to vote no, and I've taken a very active stance. In so much so that when my team is going door to door to talk about my campaign, we're identifying folks who are voting no on the Constitutional Convention. So when I'm asking to get the vote out for me, we're getting the vote out against the Constitutional Convention as well. And the reasons are very clear. You know, we have the downstate in New York would be at a disadvantage, primarily because the Senate districts are larger downstate. So we would have less representation proportionally than upstate. Right? My biggest concern is, frankly, that the folks in this community who rely on their pensions, you know, we make a trust in this community. When we look at sanitation, police officers, firefighters, teachers, when you serve our community, when you serve our children, when you protect our families, we tell you that we're going to take care of you. Because that's what this city, that's what this state, that's who we are, that's what we're about. We take care of one another. And I have seen it happen in ballot initiatives across the country where interests who are not aligned with the community pour money in an attempt to spread lies and misinformation to voters. And my biggest concern is that if this constitutional convention were to go through, that the money really could override You know, I worked on domestic partnership registries when I was in college in Florida. And I remember a vote on marriage equality failing in that state. And I remember the failure being so striking because so many of my friends, even people who were supportive of my right to get married, had voted against our right to do so unintentionally because of the way that that language was worded. So even if every other part of what we just discussed was not something to fear, the amount of education we would need to do statewide and the amount of fighting we would need to do just to make sure that every single initiative that came to ballot was clear language that was easily understood so people knew exactly what they were going to be voting on, well, frankly, that's an order that's too tall to risk with our pension.
So I will be a little briefer than Dylan because I think he actually articulated the cause of the no vote very well. I'll be voting no. What I just don't want to ever do, though, is in this case, 99% of my job is making decisions on your behalf, and I'm expected to know more than you, and that's what you judge me on. When it comes to this particular ballot referendum, the people who put this in the Constitution 150 years ago, in 1840, 170 years ago, meant this to be your choice and not my choice. And they meant it to keep both money out of it and politicians out of it. And I'm voting no. Basically, you heard the great reasons why we should be voting no. But I think you should choose. Although I'm breaking my own rule, my buddies put a "I'm voting no" sticker on my truck, and it's still there. I kept it on. But I think you guys should do what you're doing now. I think you should go home. I think you should read the literature that's provided by your union. I think you should go read literature that's provided by the advocates and see which you would decide. I don't know any better than you on this issue what's better for our state. And the people who put this in meant for you to decide, not me. So I don't want to put words in your mouth. Thank you.
I actually liked an opportunity to respond to his response. While I'm glad we agree on this issue, you just drew a very clear line between who we are and what our plans are for this community. Because I don't believe the people in this room are judging us based on whether we know better than they do. I believe they're judging us based on whether we're willing to listen to the things that they need, so that we can go out and advocate for those things before the city. Leadership to me looks like sharing with this community and going, you know what, I'm voting no. Here's exactly why I'm voting no, and here's why I encourage you to do the same thing. And the people in this room all have the freedom to do what they believe the right thing is to do for themselves. You and I agree on that, and they should absolutely go home and make sure they're informed on those opinions. But leadership looks like stepping out front on these issues, being very clear and present, and not attacking unions online. A couple of months ago, you posted something that said unions were using scare tactics, and I don't follow your social media very much. I haven't thought about this as running against you. I've been running for this community and for this job, but every once in a while something pops up. And you had posted something that said that unions were using scare tactics on their members, and that the folks behind this and who were pouring money into this didn't have the intention to take their pensions. When you look around the country at what's been happening to organized labor, when you look at what's happened to cops, to firefighters, to teachers around the country, the evidence is irrefutable that the middle class is under attack, and leaders in this community, elected and unelected, need to be stepping up and speaking out and doing everything we can to protect the people in our community who need those protections.
He wants to address that. I think we're going to pass on talking about unions because it wasn't one of the questions that I received, and I think that we have so many other topics to discuss, and I have two more that I want to bring up. One of them being concerns for health, as you brought up earlier on this part of the island, health services agencies, especially for the elderly, with all the complaints that we're hearing about services that are not being provided for them, as well as perhaps some new avenues of assisted living facilities that are going up. People are asking me about hearing that there are some new projects and proposals taking place, and I think that it would be good to find out what is going on and what's potentially possible.
Yeah. So there are some good news. There is some good news in terms of healthcare coming towards Staten Island. Unfortunately, it's probably far off, and I hate to say that, but it most likely is. The first project that will probably come up online is Farm Colony, which is a senior community, assisted living community, which we vastly need. Now, I don't want to name names, but there used to be a number of very good assisted living and nursing homes on Staten Island, and over the past few years, I've heard nothing but complaints. Now, I use my discretionary money to sort of supplement some of the services and the ones that are nonprofit. I can't intervene when they're not nonprofit, unfortunately. But we do need more. We had a developer come to us last year and promise to make a site on the south shore of Staten Island that's right now it's capped, a former smelting site in Tottenham. They came to us and they said they wanted to build 848 houses. And we said, no way, no how. Right now, we're at the point in that negotiation where they actually listened to the community. They had a public hearing. The community, the elected officials, were unanimous in speaking that we want more health services on Staten Island. And as of now, the proposal is basically they're going to build half of a medical facility. Now, will that be a full-service hospital? Probably not, because we are going to have to go through the process with the state called Article 28 certificate of need. I'm not sure we can get another full-service hospital, and if we did, it would be offered to probably the two existing hospital systems on the island. That said, there is an opportunity here to build something good, both in terms of assisted living, nursing care, and ambulatory surgical facilities. And we are in talks with both hospital systems on Staten Island about this, whether it be Rumsey's Mount Sinai affiliation that comes and takes over the site. That would be absolutely wonderful. Whether it be Northwell Health that wants to commit to this site, and they already plan on spending about $300 million in new services and upgrades to their facilities on Staten Island. That includes north and south. But if they can expand and take over new services like assisted living, which we desperately need, that would be the best way to do it. You know, there's always talk about a public hospital. It's a good talking point. But I don't know whether you've been to Bellevue or been to Coney Island or Kings County. Those are just not healthcare places, hospitals that I would want my constituents visiting. I think we can do better with the private sector in this regard. I think we have to continue fighting for more HHC dollars, which we've been successful. Dylan was right. A lot of these services are going to the North Shore because they're basically placed on need and in lower income communities, and that's fine. But we certainly do need more on the South Shore. We certainly do need to elevate the equipment and capabilities of Staten Island University Hospital South. My son, if you notice, he lost his tooth a few weeks ago. We literally had to, he knocked his tooth out, we had to call the hospital ahead of time to see if they had a dental surgeon there, and when they told us we didn't, we had to drive to North. And I mean, these are the kind of things that we face every time. Our delegation has been successful. You know, the one thing we also need in terms of healthcare is new ERs. Our hospital beds may not be full, but our ERs certainly are. And we put together a $12 million package for Rumsey to upgrade their emergency room. That's happening. Additionally, we had $28 million for SIUH, mostly through Sandy money. I happily give my discretionary money to Staten Island University Hospital South. That's, you know, like I said before, that's where I try to go to the ER. We have funding available for new patient monitoring units there. So we're trying. There's no easy answer. I mean, there's no easy answer. And, you know, we're just going to have to keep fighting. And the battle, again, is always for the HHC dollars, not necessarily for a public hospital.
Yet another point on which the council member and I differ, rather respectfully, is that, you know, the Health and Hospitals Corporation, the public hospitals in the city of New York, are ranked some of the best hospitals in the country. They're one of the few places where as a city that we can ensure that nurses are able to have safe staffing, which is not happening around the state. The state bill for safe staffing, which is 1 nurse to 4 patients, still has not passed. We still have not been able to make sure that that's gone forward. But on the city level, at the city hospital, we can ensure that that's happening. To the credit and to the point that, even locally with the minimal HHC services we have at Seaview for the Adult Rehabilitation Center, that is ranked the best of any of the nursing facilities on Staten Island by a clear mile. And the problem that my family faced was that the facilities on Staten Island could not accommodate someone who needed IV nutrition and wound care. So if you're in critical and chronic need, the facilities on Staten Island, even at that time, Seaview, were not able to help, right? And so, sorry that your son had to go to Northside, but this is something, as you said, we both agree that people in our community are suffering from the fact that Staten Island South is not full service and doesn't have really what we need. I don't trust to say, okay, well, you know, we're going to push for Northwell to have another site there, not with the unethical way that they bargain with their workers, and the way that they segment their workers to ensure that they can't actually bargain collectively together. That's a major problem for me, having experienced services at Northwell for years as a caregiver and seeing that there is one wound care nurse that goes between North Site and South Site, that there is one pharmacy department set between both sites. So at South Site, if they don't have a medication, they need to call in to North Site, and North Site doesn't have it. North Site needs to call it in. It needs to get delivered to North Site and then brought down south for the patient. You know, they're not operating efficiently, and it seems very evidently that anyone who's had to suffer through what goes on at Northwell, that they're cutting corners, and I frankly don't want to put forward or push for them to have any more access to money for patients in the community. I want to make sure that, you know what, we can co-locate a public hospital because frankly, we would be some of the best payees in the city because we have the highest union labor and people generally have good insurance in our community, although there are problems with insurance in our community that merits a longer conversation. And we would actually be doing a service to health and hospitals by ensuring that we would have that here because we would be a boom. It would be a city check on private services that are not being done well. And frankly, knowing that they are the best, some of the best hospitals in the country, we need to be pushing for access. And if they can do that with schools, they can co-locate private schools and public schools across the city through this co-location program. Well, then we use precedent for what precedent is due. We use that precedent against the city to say, well, if you can do it with schools, there is no credible reason that we couldn't do it with healthcare.
Pat came there, so Pat can attest that I was a sponsor of both the safe patient handling bill and the safe staffing bill, and I joined you guys on your picket lines when Northwell Health wasn't treating you well, and I understand they still aren't, but it doesn't mean we don't have to work with them as a hospital. And I mean, I don't think using the model of co-location with schools is a good idea. I mean, I think one of the worst things the Department of Education does is co-locate public schools with private schools.
Oh, we agree that that's
and has kids going in the same door and getting an equal education. But if we disagree, everyone can agree. So we agree with that.
We agree on education. We agree that co-location and education is a bad thing, but that's a model for precedent to allow for that in healthcare.
One last question, because that's all we have time for, and we really want to thank the candidates for presenting a very credible reasoning arguments for the proposals that they have and what they see for our future. Thank you very much. Let's give them a big hand. Question, which is probably more emotional, but it's one that I received, and that has to do with immigration and the problems that we face. And the City Council, being Democratic vote that it has, passed 1566A, which is a proposal to enhance, expand the Office of Immigrant Affairs, and the council member had voted no. And I think this would be a good idea to sort of summarize your viewpoints from what you propose for what you think we should be doing, and including perhaps the idea for and against the sanctuary city type model, which is what we implicitly have. So we'd like to hear from the two of you regarding that.
Councilmember voted no, and I'd love to hear why. I'm going to have the opportunity to respond.
Sure. So 1566 was a bill that passed earlier last month, and it was a bill that doesn't actually provide any new services for immigrants. It's a bill that expands the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. The Mayor's Office has up to 700 people right now. That's up about 200 from where Mayor Bloomberg had it. This is a way to just simply enhance the staff that the mayor has. Now, we have agencies that actually do provide, wonderful services for immigrant communities and people who need it, English background, non-English speakers, et cetera, et cetera. When you go to an HAC facility, when you go to an HRA office, when you go to a DOA HMH office, you're actually seeing someone providing a service. When you're simply giving the mayor the opportunity to hire more staff and essentially expanding their role in reporting, and the reporting, I actually pulled the text up before I came to this bill to make sure I was speaking accurately, but essentially reporting on services that already exist in the city. Now, when we, as a contrast, when we made the Department of Veterans Affairs, that's separate and apart. That was starting a new agency that was going to actually do case management and case work with veterans, whether that be getting them housing, to even getting their property tax benefits. This is not that. This is simply a bill that expands the mayor's capabilities, and we already see that the mayor has the mayor's payroll of people that are listed as special assistants to the mayor has gone up 140% since Mayor Boomer. And you can't be a Republican who wants to vote for lower taxes without occasionally voting against the expansion of government. And I mean, this is not removing services from people, it's not really adding services from people, but it's the cost of the program and the expansion of the mayor's staff.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you were also asking about how we felt about sanctuary cities.
Yeah, sure. It's a part of that. But
yeah, and then I'll...
Yeah, so I believe that New York City should comply with ICE detainers as they had. The Trump administration was not the first administration to threaten New York City. The first real threat to remove sanctuary city police funding came from the Obama administration in March or May of 2016, when Leonard Lynch was the Attorney General at the time. And do I believe there should be mass deportations? Absolutely not. Do I believe that immigrants have a value in our community? Absolutely. But New York City shouldn't be out there defying federal law. And we should certainly not have or instruct our police department to ignore federal law enforcement requests and ICE detainers for people who rightfully shouldn't be here. And these are people that potentially have committed a crime, and I'm okay with that.
I think the key word there from the council member is potentially. I'm a staunch supporter of sanctuary cities. I'm not ashamed of that. I have I won't apologize for it. My family came to this country in the 40s. My grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and he was able to get here in 1949 as a displaced person. We had tried to come earlier, so goes the family legend, and we were rejected. A major reason people are fleeing other parts of the country, or other parts of the world, rather, some of it has to do with the drug war that we started around the world. We talk about what's going on in South America and Central America. People are fleeing violence from policies that our nation advocated to be used around the world. And to me, it's a term of safety. It's a term of we can't dehumanize the people that we're talking about. It's easy to talk about sanctuary cities and label folks as criminals and to other people and say that at the end of the day, we're going to take care of our own, you go back your way. I would have living family, a big family, if this country hadn't turned us away the first time on the suspicion that Jews who were coming to this country, that Nazis would be hiding among those ships. And now we live in a world where there's actually Nazis marching in the street. I'd like to deport those people, but that's a whole other conversation. I am not obstinate to say that if folks are committing violent crimes, that they shouldn't be deported. That's absolutely something I think anybody who's sensible on this issue would agree with. But the majority of what we're talking about in terms of sanctuary cities, part of what we're talking about is making sure, that the police can't just run into a school and rip out a child without a warrant. That's what this boils down to. It's following ethical, legal procedure in this country. The Declaration of Independence talks about a right to life. You know, we talk about being able to live freely in this country. To me, it just comes down to doing what this country has always done best, which is provide opportunity for people around the world to come here and be that beacon on the hill, to be that shining example of what it really means to take care of one another. And immigrants are really what makes this country beautiful.
Issues on which they share, and unfortunately time precludes us from taking questions from the floor because the council member has another engagement. So again, we thank you so much for coming and look forward to what's happening in the next month.